Good afternoon, everyone. This is Evangelos Kaiser, the Professor Director of the Frame Mobility Research Institute. We have set up webinars every month, usually twice per month, but December we have only the privilege to have Dr. Bruce Wang from Texas A&M to give this interesting talk about truck parking on highways and the modeling around it. Dr. Bruce Wang is a professor of transportation engineering at Texas A&M University. He has published extensively and served as an editorial member on several respected journals in transportation area, including Transportation Research Record. Dr. Wang research expertise is in applying operation research theories and techniques related to transportation, in particular to freight and logistics planning and operation, addressing both economic competitiveness and environmental sustainability. In recent years, he has also conducted research in the general area of intelligent transportation systems, and I'm glad that we have Dr. Wang as a partner in the Frame Mobility Research Institute. And Bruce, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Evangelos, for the introduction. I'm Bruce Wang. Today, the topic that I'm going to present on is modeling truck parking on highways. This is a research project funded by the Freight Mobility Research Institute, for which Dr. Kaiser is the director at Florida Atlantic University. We are a consortium member. The collaborators on this project include a PhD student, Cholan Ma, and Professor Yanglong Zhang, my colleague in the civil engineering and the environmental engineering department, civil and environmental engineering department. This is the outline I'm going to follow through during the presentation. First, I'm going to turn off the video so you can focus on the slide. But I can still hear everybody's talk. After a brief introduction to the background, I'm going to clearly describe the study problem that we work at. And after that, I'm going to mention some relevant literature to our study. Our study really has a far root in the upper Midwest region. When I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at Seafire with Professor Teresa Adams, we conducted a study that led to my interest in this, and we had some findings back then. The findings are very relevant to the project that we have been studied at Texas A&M. So I'm going to introduce the study back then before we present the models and findings through the projects at Texas A&M. In the end, I'm going to briefly conclude this presentation with major findings. Trucking is a major mode of freight transportation in terms of the total tonnage, in terms of the total value shipped. It's a vast operation and a major component of the national economy. Truckers haul freight for short and long distances. Particularly for long-haul transportation, truckers are easily subject to fatigue. And that's why the national statistics show that the highway fatal crashes involve a significant percentage of the vehicles being trucks. And that's why the hours of service regulation came into play. And I don't remember the specific number of hours truckers need to stop operation for rest, but my student Cholan Ma remembers very well. Cholan, can you briefly introduce the hours of service regulation in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So the hours of service refers to the maximum amount of time drivers are permitted to be on duty, including the driving time, and specify the number and length of the rest period, and to help to ensure the driver to stay awake and alert. And for the details, there's several clauses in this regulation. I will give you some brief ideas, core ideas of this regulation. For the details, you can check the latest version, which is just published on September 2020 on the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's website. So I will give you some brief ideas of this regulation. The first one is the 11 hours driving limit, which requires the driver have a maximum of driving time of 11 hours after 10 consecutive hours of duty. And the second one is the 14-hour limit. And the drivers may not drive beyond the 14th consecutive hour after coming on duty, following by the 10 consecutive hours of off duty. And third one is the 30 minutes driving break. The drivers must take a 30 minutes break when they have a driving for a period of 8 cumulative hours without at least 30 minutes interruption. And there's other clauses, and this regulation divided by the carrier properties. And for example, they have different regulation for the property carriers and the passenger carriers drivers. The three clauses I mentioned is basically we considered in our model. And again, if you are interested in the details, you can check on the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website. And they also develop a tool to evaluate if your schedule is meet this regulation or not. So,
okay, thank you, Cholan. Thank you for the introduction. The reason we introduced we reiterate the hours of service regulation is because this concerns the number of hours that truckers drive and the number of hours they choose to rest in the rest areas. Both hours show distributions, and both distributions are input to our models that we're going to present in the later part of the presentation. So truck parking is a national issue because truckers oftentimes find no place to park when they need to rest. And what do? They have two choices. They continue to drive beyond the allowed hours of driving, which violates the hours of service regulation. Choice two is they park on ramps or at roadside, which is also a violation of the rule. So truck parking issue has been a national concern for decades. There have been many studies. The focus of the study has been all around, about the capacity sufficiency on the highways, or about to diagnose the areas or places or parking locations where the parking capacity falls in shortage. So that's the very much the primary concern to the public sector. So our interest follows right in that direction. And in order to develop the model, we need to clearly define the study problem. And this is the definition of the study problem. In this definition, we have a roadway network on which truckers drive, and truckers have their driving hours and rest hours, which each follow a distribution. And our study goal is to examine the capacity needs or the demand for parking capacity along the roadway. So there are several notions And there's a problem or related to this problem. The first is truck parking is a density issue instead of an issue about the size of a particular rest area. So this is a very important notion. To change the size of a parking area or to increase the capacity at a particular location may solve the parking problem for a significant area in the surrounding region. So this is the implication of the first notion. The second notion is truck parking is a behavioral issue that's related to how truckers choose to drive or choose to alternate between driving and resting. Some truckers like to drive for 8 straight hours before coming to a 30 minutes break, and others may like to drive for 5 hours and then break, and then another 3 or 4 hours. So this is a behavioral issue, and their behavior largely determines how the parking demand are generated. And also the trucker's behavior or trucker's trucking operation is a process constrained by the logistical need. And the logistical need basically is about the driving distance between the origin and their final destination, and the time windows associated with their pickup and delivery operations. So this logistical background has a lot to do with the parking demand. One example is some truckers stage outside a major metropolitan area waiting for early morning delivery. So the staging activity is one behavior constrained by the logistical constraint. So in this on this topic, there have been a lot of studies, as I said, all revolve around diagnose the need for parking capacity. But there are several sub areas. If we want to classify the literature, we can easily find these are the sub areas that the literature fall into. The first is called truck parking hours, and there have been researchers studying the parking hour distributions. One example is a report by Professor Washburn at the University of Florida, published in 2016. And we read that report. We also luckily got some data from Professor Washburn. The second category is about the rest area utilization. And Professor Golias at the University of Memphis recently published a report analyzing the utilization rate of the rest area. The third category is about direct parking demand forecast. As early as in 2002, the Federal Highway published a report detailing the calculation of truck parking needs based on truck traffic volume, based on the split of the truck traffic between short haul and long haul. So this report is interesting. Oh, I can hear somebody's talking. Any question? Okay. The report is interesting because short haul traffic and long haul traffic exhibit different parking needs. The fourth category is very general, is about the public-private sector partnership and the financial mechanisms. And another category is about diagnosed truck parking capacity shortage in a region. So which was, was the area, the topic area that we studied in back in 2007, 2008, when I was with Teresa Adams, a seafarer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we try to diagnose the areas where truck parking shortage has frequently been observed. So that's this study directly related to what I'm going to present about the models to calculate for the parking capacity needs. So I'm going to introduce that earlier study we conducted along with Teresa and another then graduate researcher, Praveen Srinivastava. He was an excellent graduate student. The study was published in a journal. The result is available now. And that study was funded by the Upper Midwest Freight Research Coalition, a 10-state coalition in the Upper Midwest region. So the left side shows the Upper Midwest region, also called 10-state Mississippi Valley region, that the study covers. And the right side is a snapshot of interactive GIS-based survey tool that the graduate student Praveen developed. I didn't realize that I would like the tool so much today back then. So this GIS survey tool was developed by Praveen himself. And we brought this survey tool in our computer to truck shows and also to public planners, highway patrols, for them to mark locations where they have experienced or observed issues. The issues include shortage of parking capacity, or difficulty to find a parking spot, or roadside parking, ramp parking, concern about safety and security, poor service, so on and so forth. And participants can zoom in and zoom out, to click on any location in the map where an issue or issues have been observed. And then after a marker is put on the map, the participant can put in information about what kind of issue has been experienced or observed. You can rate the issue on a scale, so on and so forth. So we can collect the inputs later on and analyze, where problems have been frequently observed or experienced. The tool is very convenient. As I look at that tool yesterday again, I found participants could also search for a milepost on a highway, or can locate a spot by putting in an address or search through landmark. It's so convenient. I'm amazed today by something the student did 12 years ago. So this map basically shows the results we have collected where issues have been observed. We can choose to show only spots with the shortage of parking capacity experienced by truckers. We can also show only spots with security concerns, so on and so forth. So we can analyze the locations based on the categories. So this is what we concluded. Within the 10-state region in the Mississippi Valley, we developed a clustering method to cluster the locations, identify the participants where truck parking shortages have been frequently observed or experienced. So the clusters are shown on the right-hand side in colors. The red color circles are the clusters based on the inputs from the public sector participants, who are mainly planners and highway patrols, And the gray clusters are based on primarily truckers' input. So you can see areas where truck parking capacity shortages have been experienced or observed or identified. So this supports our initial notion that truck parking is an area issue, not a spot issue. So we just carried on that notion to this study today. So in today's study, we just try to develop analytical tools to calculate the truck parking demand for an area or for a roadway, but not for a particular spot. So our methodology does not apply to a particular spot, but to an area which include lines of roadway, maybe just one long line of roadway or multiple lines, multiple intertwining roadway sections. So we expect to deliver a product that can calculate the density of rest area capacity needs on the roadway network, which means the number of parking stalls per mile of roadway for this area on the average. Public planners we expect can use our tool to calculate the parking density needs along the roadways, and then they can decide where to put in parking areas. So the input to the study include the truck traffic volume, the roadway miles involved or covered within the area of study, and the driving and rest hour distribution according to the behaviors of the truckers. In order to approach this difficult problem, we have to make some assumptions. The first is we believe truckers alternate between driving and rest. There's a typo here. It's not alternative, it's alternate. I believe somebody changed. The second is that truckers are considered, each trucker is considered just a random outcome from a population of truckers that follow a certain distribution for driving and resting. Staging and other practical constraints or end of trip and the beginning and end of trip constraints are tentatively relaxed. We just assume truckers, they just continuously driving, which may be true if we just take out the night times, the off-duty days or hours, they are continuously driving. They alternate between driving and resting. So we have some notions. You don't have to pay attention to the symbols here. These notions indicate the factors that we consider in our later model. Like the first is the driving hours, okay? The second is the rest hours. Both hours follow distributions there, as we will see in the data on the later slide. And for each, we have expected a number of hours, and we also have a truck traffic volume here, the average truck driving speed, and the spacing of rest areas. And the next one is the confidence factor, Z sub alpha. Most people recognize Z sub alpha right away. So that's the Z number for standard normal distribution. This is also a very important notion because many people, when they study truck parking demand, they aim at providing sufficient demand to satisfy sufficient capacity to satisfy all the demand. Which is theoretically not not possible, because if we consider demand as a random factor, it's very hard for us to construct parking areas with such large capacities that we can satisfy demand at whatever peaking hours. That's probably not we should aim at. So the Z sub alpha is a confidence factor that we use here, trying to calculate for parking capacity needs that can satisfy, for example, 95% of the demand or 99% of the demand, but we don't aim at satisfying 100% of the demand, which would naturally result in a serious underutilization of the parking area. Beta is a peaking factor during a day, which measures the relative ratio between the average hourly volume or average hourly parking demand to the peak hour demand or peak hour volume. So beta is also an important factor. When we develop the capacity or calculate the capacity, we want to primarily satisfy the demand during the peak hours. We have several findings here. The first is truckers' driving process basically is a renewal process. A renewal process, literally means it periodically renew itself to form a long time of driving. So this renewal process basically alternate between driving and resting. In the renewal process, there is an average driving distance for each trucker. Right? Each trucker, if we only look at one trucker, we know for every certain number of miles, the trucker need to come to a stop, okay, due to the trucker's personal choice. And the choice may be forced by the hours of service through, or may be a natural derivative of the trucker's personal desire. So for every certain number of hours of driving, the trucker needs to stop and rest. So that naturally gives rise to parking density. So one trucker corresponds to a parking density needs along the roadway. If we have a truck traffic volume V there, we naturally can calculate the rest density needs along the roadway. So the formula in the middle basically shows the density needs for a truck traffic volume of V along the roadway, assuming there is an average driving hours for the truckers, which is H, and a V here is the driving speed. So this is the first finding, based on the renewal process. And the later findings, represent improvement to the first finding. For example, finding 2 considers the level of service factor. So we don't, if we provide the parking capacity as calculated in finding 1, which is the average parking demand, naturally we can only satisfy 50% of the demand, roughly 50% of the demand, which is not our goal. Our goal is to satisfy probably 95% of the demand. So this comes to the introduction of the Z factor. Z sub alpha is the Z number corresponding to a certain level of service. For example, the Z can be 1.96, and the beta considers the peaking factor. Beta can be 0.4, 0.3, depending on the actual calibration of the peaking effect during the day. So finding 2 can also be further improved to consider the effect of parking area spacing. In the middle here, we in the denominator, we reduced the distance that each time a trucker can drive on the average, because truckers sometimes they have a little bit of time remaining, but not enough to get to the next rest area. So they have to stop at the rest area they come into. That directly result in a loss of effective driving hours to them. So we need to take that into consideration. So that got to the equation right in the middle there. So we also provided an example calculation of the parking stall density or parking capacity needs density along the roadway. If we assume a traffic volume of 1,137 per hour, and we want to achieve a level of service of 95%, which 90%, which corresponds to a Z factor of 1.645, and assuming the average driving hour being 5 and rest hour being 5 too, then we can calculate the parking density need to be 1.3 stalls per mile. For such a traffic, we would need about 1.3 stalls for every mile. And sometimes we realize that people like to use the vehicle miles traveled instead of the truck traffic volume. Then, we further improve the formula into using the vehicle miles traveled, the truck vehicle miles traveled. And this formula, we need to use the total roadway miles in the area of interest and the total vehicle miles traveled for that area too. With this in mind, we can also calculate the truck parking density there. This finding number 4, is very interesting. This is not directly related to the formulas we introduced, but this is just a straightforward observation. So there are 2 ways to develop truck parking areas. Both the ways get to the same level of parking density provision. Okay. So they are called Plan 1 and Plan 2. The blue graph is called Plan 1. The lower one, the green one, is Plan 2. In Plan 1, the rest areas are located on roadsides in both directions, but between the intersections, between the major junctions. Okay? And in Plan 2, the rest areas are provided at the junction area. So each rest area serves traffic in 2 directions. For example, in the blue, in Plan 1, so each rest area serves only traffic in 1 direction. In Plan 2, like this one, serves the traffic to the west and to the north. And this area, parking area, serves traffic to the south and east together. So in Plan 2, each parking area has double the capacity as in Plan 1. But the number of parking areas in Plan 2 is only half that in Plan 1. And the level of service conceivably is higher in Plan 2 because there's a pool effect. It's just one queuing system with double the capacity compared to 2 parallel queuing systems with half of the capacity each. So both plans provide the same parking density to the truckers area-wide, but Plan 2 is much better than Plan 1. So that's our 4th finding. This is regarding how to implement the result we have calculated. in our pursuit for the analytical calculation of truck parking demand for areas or for network, there are many challenging issues that we feel very hard to overcome. One of which is the parking hours distribution. These two graphs are based on data we obtained provided by Professor Washburn at the University of Florida. We reached to him, and he nicely provided his data to us. So we find that for daytime parking, the average parking time is very low. You can see on the left side, the graph shows most of the parking time falls below 30 minutes, meaning they are just for a short break. And on the right side, for the overnight parking, the average probably is around 9 to 10 hours. As we said, in our formula, we have a parking hour distribution to calculate the parking demand. So how to deal with the dichotomy of the parking distribution between daytime and nighttime? We have to address this. So this will get us to a hard thinking process. There are many other challenges lay right in the road of our study. One of them is data. So luckily, we have found some sources of data from many generous colleagues nationwide. And so what we expect to get if somebody in the audience, are not quite on the same page with me, this is another slide to illustrate what we expect to get from our truck parking study. In the end, we want to provide a tool to calculate for the truck parking demand, okay, or the truck parking density for each area of interest, for areas of varying truck vehicle miles traveled, for example. Like we can calculate for regions with high density needs, regions with low density needs, so on and so forth. Of course, the density needs are specified in numbers, not by categories. And let's come back to the example we introduced earlier to illustrate our ideas a little better. In this example, why Plan 2 is better than Plan 1? So the answer to this shows the clue to our findings or our study. Plan 2, you can see, let me show the screen. Okay, in Plan 2, we can see in areas around the junctions, the traffic volume is high, okay, or the vehicle miles traveled, truck vehicle miles traveled is high. And for areas in between the junctions, the vehicle miles traveled is lower than in areas around the junction. Yeah, we are coming to the end of it. So this is what we expect to find. We want to develop a tool that planners can use to analytically follow the vehicle miles traveled, follow the traffic on the network according to areas, according to regions, but not according to particular parking spots. Okay, so the tool is not used to calculate capacity for particular parking spot. As we mentioned in the literature, there are studies that are being conducted to forecast the parking demand at particular spots. by using time series method, by analyzing the historical parking pattern at a particular spot. But that's not our pursuit here. Our pursuit here is to calculate the parking demand area-wise, okay, or network-wise. And many other studies also fall in the same direction as ours. For example, we recently found a truck parking study published by the Texas DOT this year. In this study, they also identify, locations where, high demand for truck parking are identified. But you can see the black dots on this map. The black dots you can see on the map, or the gray dots on the map, you can see they form areas. Okay, you see, they form areas. So this reinforces the perception that truck parking capacity is an issue related to an area, not to a particular point. And although in this study they identify points there, because that's where the current rest areas are located. And again, this study tries to examine the adequacy of truck parking capacity on the roadway network, or in other words, to calculate the truck parking demand on the network. And a notion that we feel very important that I want to reiterate here is that truck parking is not a spot issue, but it's an area issue or a network issue. So we hope to develop a tool that planners or researchers can use to calculate the truck parking needs based on factors that we already know. For example, the truck traffic volume, the roadway mileage, so on and so forth. But there are a lot to do. For example, we need to calibrate parameters for the driving hour distribution or parking hour distribution, which involves much work. So there are also other challenges there that we don't mention here. And I want to especially acknowledge some former and current colleagues who helped this research from the very beginning, back 10 years ago to now. Teresa Adams just retired several years ago from being the CFIRE director at UW-Madison. And I also want to thank Scott Washburn at University of Florida for providing the data in Florida. And we have a TTI colleague, Yolanda Prazi. She and her colleagues nicely spent quite some time going over the truck parking studies, the data they have, the findings they found. Our team here feel especially grateful for that. And the last one, but not the least, Mike Golias at the University of Memphis. Professor Golias and I have talked about collaboration. I think he has a lot of stuff there. He may be the potential solver to this problem and saver to us too. I look forward to work with him to bring this study to a meaningful end. This concludes my presentation. Now, I think the time is a little longer than I thought. So I'm ready for questions now.
Yes, we will now be taking questions from the audience, and thank you, Dr. Wang, for your presentation. If you can either unmute yourself if you want to speak your question, or you can send using the chat. I have one question here from Tom. On slide 16, how was the overnight parking be differentiated from the daytime parking? when the average overnight parking duration exceeds 10 hours. In other words, wouldn't many of the trucks parked for long durations? Just a second.
Okay, this is a good question. Very technical. Thank you for it. I don't remember the specific details. I think this was, I believe this was we adopted directly from the report by Professor Washburn's team. I believe their classification is right. If I'm right, the parking hours are classified based on this. I think they start from somewhere after midnight all the way to 6 or 7 in the morning. And truckers who live within this period of time are considered overnight parking. And then they track how many hours these truckers who live during this window of time. Based on that, they tabulate the overnight parking hour distribution. In other words, the overnight parking hours are obtained for truckers who leave the parking area within a window between midnight and 6 or 7 o'clock. So those truckers are considered ones with overnight parking. I may be slightly wrong regarding the beginning time and the end time. My student Cholan may correct me if he's still online, but roughly it's like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
the person who asked say that that's clear. Thank you. I have another. Would you like to add something?
Me?
No, I'm fine. I just want to clear that in their study truck parking excuse me, the lot they studied, they have detectors at the entrance and exit, and they have camera and the detectors at each parking spot. So they are able to detect their enter time and the leaving time of each truck. So they collect this data and make the statistic and plot the figure.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, good comment. Thank you, Cholan. Yes, Professor Washburn and his team installed sensor parking stalls to detect occupancy of each stall there, so they know how long each truck parked there.
Our next question is that, to your point that truck parking capacity is an issue, I agree. I think it's a good solution to be rehabbing some of the many old truck spots that exist across the United States that went out of business from big box chains and have them be multi-purpose car charging stations and truck parking. Great example on this Baker, California, that has improved their large truck parking area in addition adding Tesla charging stations, and in turn the food options and the restroom facilities have also improved for everyone. There are many places in West Texas that could serve such a purpose. Is this something that is being studied?
Thanks for sharing this. I think this is a very interesting, meaningful observation and significant in terms of addressing the parking capacity shortage. And but this is not part of our study. Our study focuses on the capacity needs. So we calculate basically the number of parking stalls needed on the network to satisfy the demand. The capacity may be provided by the public sector only. May be provided by the public sector together with the private sector from all the different sources. But from whatever sources, the combined capacity should meet what we calculate here. So what we calculate as the demand, parking demand, should be satisfied jointly by the public and private sources.
Thank you for your answer. The next question is if this study is already published.
We had our earlier study in Wisconsin about the clustering method to identify areas or regions of parking issues. That was published like 8 years ago. I think one of the people in the audience requested that report. I just emailed them. The models that we just introduced in this presentation are still in development, are not final yet, and we had hoped to have it published many months earlier, but we haven't been able to achieve that. So we hope to publish as soon as possible.
Right, thank you. The next question is, how does the rest area support overflow trucks or at night, if any?
We know that there's overflow at rest areas almost everywhere, and truckers park on the ramp, on the roadside, in close proximity to a rest area, or even truckers park outside the rest area when the rest area still have stores available, which is weird to many of us. But I don't know, that's not our study. Our study is only regarding the adequacy of parking capacity or the demand for parking. Those parking preferences or parking issues as to where truckers choose to park is not within our study.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. The next question is, can this methodology be used to develop a monetized user benefit of adding new spaces so that a benefit cost analysis can be performed to justify the expense of constructing additional parking capacity?
In principle, yes. But this alone does not solve that problem, does not answer that question. But in principle, yes, for business models, you deal with the supply and demand. And so you need to know the demand side, right? So that you decide how much to supply. So that strikes the balance. So our research may be used to calculate for demand. And then you can decide your way to factor in the demand, about how much revenue you can generate. That's basically some extra miles you need to walk through, within the area of your interest. Our job is to provide a tool to calculate the demand, how many parking demands are there based on the truck traffic volume and based on the driving hours distribution, parking hour distribution, level of service factor, but in order to use the number that we calculate here, you probably want to be, you can be wiser than us about what kind of level of service you want to provide. If you want to maintain a high level of service, for example, 95% level of service to satisfy 95% of the demand, or to satisfy 95% of the time, 95% of the times that a trucker come to look for spots. Okay, so that probably would require you to construct a very large parking area. And during the off-peak hours, much of the area would be underutilized. Okay, so the level of service is really up to the policymakers or the business decision makers. And to the private sector, you want to maintain the profitability. To the public sector, you want to most efficiently use the public fund. That's a decision from decision makers. But to us, that's just a parameter. Whatever value decision makers want for that parameter, like the level of service, you pass to us. then you can put in the formula to calculate.
All right, thank you.
You're
How do
welcome.
wait stations impact on the truck parking?
Wait, I don't know. That's something. I don't know. How truckers choose to park around the way station. Uh, if that represents realistically some kind of parking capacity, so that would be considered a part of the total parking capacity in a network. Okay. So our job again is to calculate the need for the total parking. Okay, a total parking stalls. Okay, for an area, and this total number come from all the different sources. Maybe parking locations around way station, maybe from the business areas, shopping malls, or maybe from the public parking areas. So again, the capacity the demand we calculate here come from all the different sources comprehensively. Or capacity provisions from all the different sources should add up to the number that we calculate here.
All right, thank you. You mentioned that privacy concerns could be a constraint in gathering data. If that's correct, could you touch on how that is a concern?
Yes, I know there's a federal initiative going on to continuously collect GPS data from participating trucking companies. So A-Tree basically manages a large volume of data, and Professor Mike Golias has been using data from A-Tree. I used some data 10, 12 years ago from A-Tree as well. But the reason I said privacy concern is because we are able to maybe somehow with the charges or for free we can get data, okay, but the data is only limited to the participating companies, and we are not sure whether those participating companies are representative of the reality. If the participating companies are all from large companies, and then there might be some bias to the data we use, because smaller companies, self-operators, they may exhibit different driving behavior. They may be less law-abiding than the large companies. Their driving hours may be different. So if we use the data from one source for a particular group of participating companies, I'm not sure. Until we have more data, I cannot say the data is free of bias. Okay, so that's what I said. If we want to get comprehensive representative data, there might be hurdles down the road due to proprietary concern or privacy concern. That may not be a major problem. I just called it a concern. That may not be a major issue. Okay.
The next two are more comments. It seems that the study focused on ideal scenario first. Parking outside of designated stalls are not considered within the capacity factor in the proposed model equation. I would suggest that the authors consider using an econometric factor to reflect changes in market demand for transport. This is the first comment. The second comment is the hardest challenge we have is to estimate demand through time. The next is a question. what do you envision these proposed rest areas will be repurposed to once autonomous trucking is implemented in our society moving forward?
Airline, I'm over 50. Unfortunately, I don't. I'm very slow to respond now. I remember your first question regarding the parking overflow outside the parking area. That this audience said outside our calculation. That's probably not the case. As I mentioned, there is a category of efforts there along this line that predict the parking demand for particular rest areas. So in that line of effort, they use historical parking data. They analyze the parking area occupancy over the past months, years, and then they predict based on the past trend. They predict the future parking demand at that particular rest area. So in that type of research, it would be pretty hard for them to consider overflow of parking. Okay, so our research is different. Our research is not to analyze the past parking demand, but analyze the parking behavior. How frequently or how many hours each trucker needs to park and rest, and each time how long do they park and rest. So we find the distributions of that, and truckers even park outside the parking areas as long as we can include them in the effort for calibrating the parameters for parking hour distribution or driver hour distribution. We are fine. We can still, direct to a more accurate result.
Yes, there is one other question that talks about that. Will you be looking at the great deal of parking that occurs outside of the authorized parking stalls, such as entrance and exit ramp shoulders?
Ideally, we should. We consider in our effort, wherever they park, they desire to park. That's a demand. Okay, be it within the rest area or on the ramp or on the roadside. Those are all demand. Okay, those are all examples of driving behavior in the renewal process. So all those truckers can be included in our analysis to calibrate their desired driving hours and rest hours.
All right. Yes, thank you. That was our last question. So I think we can finish the session here. So thank you, Dr. Wang, for presenting for us today. I hope that we can collaborate in the future again.
Oh, you're welcome. It is a pleasure to present here. Thank you to you, Ellen, and Dr. Kaiser for this opportunity. I also want to thank my team members. I just showed up. They didn't. They took a lot of credit for the work we have conducted here. And I wish everybody in the audience a happy Christmas and a happy New Year.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all.